Stop scrolling right now. What if I told you that the single biggest reason you haven't reached the level of success you know you deserve has nothing to do with your intelligence, your work ethic, or your resume? It has everything to do with the way you open your mouth. Every day, in boardrooms across Manhattan, in startup garages in Austin, in hospital corridors in Chicago, in law firms in Los Angeles, the same invisible war is being fought. Not with spreadsheets, not with strategies, with words, with the weight of a pause, with the voltage of a voice. Some people walk into a room and the air changes. Others walk in and nobody notices. The difference is not luck. It is not a corner office. It is not a Harvard degree. It is a learnable system of communication that transforms ordinary people into unforgettable leaders. You are about to discover that system in full. By the time you finish this book, the way you speak to your team, your boss, your clients, your family will never be the same. That is not a promise. That is neuroscience. Your brain is about to rewire itself with the exact communication patterns that separate the leaders history remembers from the people history forgets. Let's begin. The silent crisis. Nobody talks about here is the truth that will make some people uncomfortable. Most talented professionals in America are completely invisible, not because they lack skill, not because they lack dedication, but because the moment they open their mouth, they broadcast at a frequency most people can't even consciously detect that they are followers, not leaders. You are evaluated within the first 8 seconds of speaking, not by your credentials, not by your track record, by your tonality, by your word choices, by the pace at which your thoughts arrive, by the certainty or the absence of certainty that lives inside each syllable you produce. This is the silent crisis. And it is costing millions of Americans their promotions, their negotiations, their relationships, and their futures. Think about the last meeting you attended. Who held the room? Who lost it? Who was consulted first when a decision needed to be made? Now, ask yourself honestly, was it always the most qualified person in the space? Almost certainly not. It was the person who communicated like a leader, even when nobody gave them the title of one. Let's demolish a few dangerous myths that are keeping you stuck. Leadership communication is not about volume. The loudest voice in the room is almost always the most insecure. Real authority never needs to shout. Leadership communication is not about complex vocabulary. Using elaborate language to signal intelligence is the communication equivalent of wearing a tuxedo to a job interview. It signals that you're trying too hard and that you don't quite belong. Leadership communication is not about dominating conversations. That's aggression dressed up as confidence. The most powerful communicators in the world are often the ones who speak least. And when they do speak, the room goes quiet on its own. So what is it then? Leadership communication is psychological positioning. It is the art of shaping how others think, feel, and act through the strategic architecture of your language. It is the ability to create reality, possibility, urgency, calm, momentum through the precise selection and delivery of words. And here is the brutal fact that most self-improvement content refuses to say out loud. Right now, if you are not deliberately practicing this system, you are accidentally practicing its opposite. Every uncertain phrase, every upward inflection that turns a statement into a question, every "I was thinking maybe we could possibly consider," these are not harmless verbal tics. They are repetitions. They are training. And your brain, magnificent and efficient as it is optimizing for exactly what you practice. Thousands of times each day, You are either building the neural architecture of a leader or reinforcing the neural habits of someone who gets talked over, dismissed, and overlooked. The good news? The architecture can be rebuilt, not with years of therapy, not with an expensive MBA, with conscious, deliberate practice of the exact frameworks in this book. The leaders you admire, the ones who seem to radiate authority without effort, who command a room without commanding a single person, they were not born this way. They internalized a system so deeply that it became automatic. They rewired themselves. You are about to do the same. The first step is the most uncomfortable one, accepting that your current way of speaking is not serving you, that the patterns you've relied on, the hedging, the seeking of approval, the reflexive softening of every strong statement, were conditioned into you by years of wanting to be liked, by a culture that confuses politeness with powerlessness, by schooling systems that reward compliance over conviction. Leadership communication demands something different. It demands that you make a choice, right now, before you turn another page, to stop communicating like someone asking for permission to exist in the room, and to start communicating like someone who built the room. That choice is the beginning of everything. The 5 pillars of the authority. Voice authority is not something you are born with. It is something you construct, sentence by sentence, conversation by conversation, until others experience it as simply who you are. Most people believe authority flows from position, from a title on a business card, an office on the top floor, a name on the organizational chart. This belief is not just wrong. It is the belief that keeps talented people waiting to be given something they could be creating right now. Authority is psychological. It is the result of communication patterns that tell the subconscious minds of everyone around you, this person is safe to follow. This person sees what I cannot see. This person will lead me somewhere worth going. There are 5 foundational pillars that construct this perception, not over months, but in the first few minutes of any interaction. Pillar 1. Certainty architecture. The single most powerful thing you can do with language is speak in outcomes, not possibilities. Notice the difference between these 2 phrases. I think we might be able to improve our customer retention if we consider adjusting our onboarding flow. We will increase customer retention by redesigning the onboarding experience. Here's exactly how we'll do it. The information is nearly identical. The psychological effect is completely different. The first phrase triggers doubt. The listener's brain hears uncertainty and files the speaker under seeking validation. The second phrase activates confidence in the listener. It signals that you have already done the mental work of seeing the outcome, and that they can trust the path you're describing. This is certainty architecture, and it is not arrogance. Arrogance is certainty without substance, real certainty. Architecture is earned through preparation, through mastery, through the discipline of thinking something completely through before you walk into the room and speak it aloud. You earn the right to declare by doing the work that declaration requires. Pillar 2. Declarative dominance. Leaders make statements. Followers ask questions. This is not about being rigid or closed to other perspectives. It is about understanding the psychological difference between a person who provides direction and a person who waits for direction to arrive. The most common form of unnecessary questioning sounds like this. Do you think we should maybe consider taking this approach? What the speaker means is, we should take this approach. The question is not a request for information. It is a request for permission. And every time you ask for permission you don't actually need, you train everyone around you to perceive you as someone who requires approval to act. Declarative dominance means replacing that question with a statement, and then defending the statement with logic, evidence, and composure when challenged. We're moving forward with this approach because it directly addresses the three core friction points we've been unable to resolve for 6 months. That sentence positions you as someone with a point of view, a rationale, and the confidence to hold both. That is what leadership sounds like. Pillar 3. Emotional regulation through tonality. Your voice is not just a vehicle for information. It is a broadcast signal that the nervous systems of everyone around you receive and mirror in real time. When you walk into a high-stakes meeting carrying anxiety, that anxiety doesn't stay inside you. It travels through subtle shifts in your pitch, in the speed of your delivery, in the micro-tensions that enter your phrasing, directly into the bodies and minds of everyone in the room. You have infected the room before you've said a sentence worth saying. Leaders understand that emotional regulation is not a personal luxury. It is a professional responsibility. The team, the client, the audience, they look to you for their emotional cue. If you project fragility, they feel fragile. If you project grounded certainty, they feel capable. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion. That approach is both psychologically harmful and strategically counterproductive. Suppressed emotions don't disappear. They leak. They show up as clipped sentences, overly controlled expressions, sudden flashes of disproportionate frustration. Real emotional regulation means channeling emotion. Anger becomes focused, precise, purposeful. Nervousness becomes energized readiness. Frustration becomes fuel for problem solving. The emotion doesn't vanish. It gets redirected through the discipline of your voice into something that serves the moment. Pillar 4. Strategic pacing and the power of the pause. Speed is the enemy of authority. When you speak too quickly, you send a signal that you are afraid of being interrupted, afraid that the thought won't survive the journey from your mouth to the other person's ears, afraid that if you don't fill the air, something worse will fill it. Fear. And fear is one of the most detectable states in human communication. Confidence speaks slowly, not because it is slow to think, because it is not worried about competition for the floor. It knows the words are worth the wait. Strategic pacing means allowing each idea to fully land before introducing the next one. It means trusting the silence between sentences. It means understanding that a 3-second pause after a powerful statement is not dead air. It is gravity. It is the weight of an idea being absorbed. Practice this deliberately. The next time you make an important point in a meeting, pause. Count to 4 in your head. Watch what happens. The room adjusts. Attention sharpens. The statement gains presence. Pillar 5. Value-first communication. Every sentence you speak is either adding value or withdrawing it. Filler words, performative small talk, verbal meandering, these don't just waste time. They actively signal to the subconscious minds of your audience that your communication is not curated, not intentional, not worth the full allocation of their attention. Value. First communication means asking yourself before any important conversation, what is the outcome I'm here to create? What clarity am I here to provide? What next step am I here to establish? And then building every sentence in service of those questions, and nothing else. When these 5 pillars are consistently applied, something remarkable happens. You become the kind of communicator that other people seek out, not because you're the most senior person in the room, but because you're the most useful. The invisible weapon, strategic silence. The most underused tool in the entire arsenal of leadership communication costs nothing, requires no technology, and is available to you in every conversation you will ever have. It is silence, and most people are absolutely terrified of it. Watch what happens in any meeting when silence arrives unannounced. Someone, usually the most anxious person in the room, immediately rushes to fill it with a comment that didn't need to be made, with a question that answers itself, with a tangent that dilutes the moment. They cannot help themselves. Their discomfort with silence is greater than their desire to be heard thoughtfully. Leaders have trained themselves to feel the opposite. For them, silence is not a void to be filled. It is a space to be inhabited strategically. It is the moment when real communication happens, when ideas land fully, when tension builds productively, when the listener's mind does the deeper work of processing, rather than just receiving. Here is the psychology of why strategic silence is so powerful. At the cognitive level, silence creates processing time. When you make a statement and then pause for 3 to 5 seconds, you are giving the other person's brain the time it needs to fully absorb your message. Without that processing time, your words often disappear into the mental noise of their own forming response. Heard, but not integrated. Acknowledged, but not acted upon. At the emotional level, silence creates productive tension. When you ask a powerful question and then wait, genuinely, calmly wait, you create a gentle pressure that motivates honest, considered responses. Most people will fill that space with more truth than they originally planned to share. They will reveal their real concerns, their real objections, their real motivations, all because you had the composure to stay quiet. At the social level, silence signals strength. People who are comfortable with silence signal that they do not need constant external validation. They are not afraid of their own thoughts or of what others might be thinking in the gap. This comfort is read, instinctively, accurately, as emotional maturity, self-possession, and authority. Let me give you 5 specific applications of strategic silence that you can begin using immediately. The post statement. Pause. After making an important point, stop. Do not immediately qualify it, expand it, or undercut it with hedging language. Let the statement exist in the silence for 3 to 5 seconds. This pause communicates that what you just said deserves full consideration. It creates emphasis without theatrics. The question-response gap. When someone asks you a question, particularly a challenging or unexpected one, resist the biological urge to respond immediately. Take 3 to 7 seconds. In those seconds, 2 things happen simultaneously. You formulate a better answer, and the questioner recalibrates their perception of you upward. Slow response time signals that you take the question seriously and that your answer will be worth waiting for. The strategic non-response. Sometimes the most powerful move in a conversation is no move at all. When someone delivers a comment designed to provoke, to destabilize, or to pull you off course, the wisest response is often silence, not uncomfortable, apologetic silence. Calm, measured silence that says, "I have heard you, I am not rattled, and I am choosing not to dignify that with what it's fishing for." The listening pause. During complex discussions, high-stakes negotiations, or tense team meetings, leaders periodically create space for others by pausing and explicitly inviting input. Let me pause here. I want to make sure I'm not talking past something important. What are you seeing that I might be missing? This technique does 3 things simultaneously. It demonstrates genuine respect for other perspectives. It provides real-time feedback on how your message is landing, and it prevents you from overexposing your position before you've gathered critical information. The decision, pause, When someone asks for an immediate response or commitment on something significant, the leader's move is not to answer immediately. It is to pause deliberately. I want to give this the thought it deserves. Let me come back to you with a complete answer. This prevents reactive decisions you'll regret later. It also signals that important matters are not treated casually, which, over time, makes every answer you do carry more weight. Here is the essential truth about mastering silence. It requires that you retrain your nervous system's relationship with discomfort. Most people have been socially conditioned to experience silence as awkwardness, as something that signals failure, rejection, or conflict. That conditioning must be consciously overwritten. Start small. In your next conversation, make a statement and then count silently to 3 before continuing. In your next meeting, ask a question and resist the urge to rephrase it before the other person has responded. In your next negotiation, let the other party fill the space after you've made your position clear. Over time, you will develop what the best communicators in the world have: an ease with silence that others interpret as wisdom. And they are not wrong. The architecture of reality, how leaders frame the world language, does not describe reality. Language constructs it. Every word you choose, every frame you place around a situation, every narrative you introduce into a conversation, these are not neutral acts. They are acts of creation. They determine what others see, what they feel, and critically, what they believe is possible. This is not an abstract philosophical point. It is a practical, deployable skill, one that the most effective leaders in American business, politics, medicine, and technology use every single day. Here is the simplest demonstration. A startup that just missed its quarterly revenue target can be framed as having failed to hit its numbers, or as having built the infrastructure for a scalable breakthrough in Q3. The facts are identical. The psychological effect is not. The first frame triggers fear, blame, and defensive behavior. The second triggers strategy, momentum, and collaborative problem-solving. You did not manipulate reality. You chose which part of reality to illuminate, and that choice changed everything that came after. Most people frame reactively. Something happens, they absorb the frame that the situation or other people present to them, and they respond within that frame. Leaders frame proactively. Before entering any conversation, they have already decided what emotional state, what mental framework, and what action orientation they want to create. And they design their language to produce exactly that. There are 7 core framing strategies that will change the way you lead every conversation you enter. Possibility. Framing versus problem. Framing. When a challenge arises, most people's instinct is to focus on what's broken, what's missing, and what obstacles exist. This is problem framing. It is natural. It is also limiting. Leaders acknowledge the challenge. They do not pretend problems don't exist, but they redirect the frame toward what's actionable. We have a serious budget shortfall becomes, we have an opportunity to identify our highest leverage priorities and eliminate everything that isn't producing proportional returns. The problem is the same. The energy it generates is completely different. Growth framing versus fixed framing. Fixed framing treats ability, circumstance, and capacity as static. You either have it or you don't. Growth framing treats all 3 as expandable through effort and strategy. When a team member makes a costly error, fixed framing labels them as unreliable. Growth framing asks, what system failure allowed this to happen? And what will we build to ensure the person and the organization learn from it? One frame removes someone from the game. The other develops a more valuable player. Agency framing versus victim framing. Victim framing focuses on what is being done to us. the economy, the competition, the decision made by someone in another department we had no control over. Agency framing focuses on what is within our sphere of influence. Leaders constantly, consistently redirect conversations from what's happening to us to what we can do about it. Not because external factors don't exist, but because focusing on them creates paralysis, while focusing on available action creates momentum. Collaboration, framing versus competition. Framing, when different teams, departments, or stakeholders are positioned against each other in a zero-sum frame, everyone loses, including the organization they serve. Leaders reframe these dynamics by positioning the shared external challenge as the opponent and the internal players as allies. It's not marketing versus product. It's marketing and product versus the market conditions we all have to navigate together. Learning framing versus judgment framing. Judgment framing evaluates outcomes as successes or failures, winners or losers. Learning framing treats every outcome as data, information that improves the quality of the next decision. Leaders who consistently apply learning framing create cultures where people are willing to take intelligent risks, make transparent decisions, and acknowledge mistakes early, because doing so is valued, not penalized. Abundance framing versus scarcity framing. Scarcity framing assumes fixed resources, zero-sum competition, and a world where every gain for one party must come at another's expense. Abundance framing assumes creative possibilities, expanding value, and multiple paths to shared success. The former produces defensiveness, hoarding, and political maneuvering. The latter produces collaboration, generosity, and the kind of creative problem-solving that generates genuine competitive advantage. Value framing versus cost framing. When proposing a new initiative, most people lead with what it will cost in money, time, and effort. Leaders lead with what it will create. They don't hide the costs. Transparency is non-negotiable, but they establish the value first, so that every discussion of cost happens in the context of what is being built rather than what is being spent. The most advanced framing skill, the one that separates exceptional leaders from good ones, is reframing in real time. When someone brings a destructive frame into a conversation, the leader's job is not to dismiss it or argue against it. It is to acknowledge the concern embedded within that frame and then offer a more empowering perspective that takes the concern seriously while opening up new possibilities for action. It sounds like your concern is that we're moving too fast to ensure quality. That's a real tension. Here's how I'd like to think about it. Speed and quality aren't necessarily opposing forces. Let's talk about where in this process quality is most critical and build specific checkpoints there, while allowing faster movement elsewhere. You did not dismiss the frame. You honored the intelligence behind it, and then you replaced it with one that creates forward movement rather than gridlock. That is the art of reframing. And once you master it, the quality of every conversation you lead will transform permanently. The psychology of real influence. Influence is one of the most misunderstood concepts in leadership. Most people confuse it with persuasion, with the ability to talk someone into something. That confusion is costly. Persuasion that moves against someone's authentic interests creates compliance that evaporates the moment the pressure is removed. It breeds resentment. It erodes trust. And in any organization where long-term results depend on sustained effort, trust is the most valuable currency in existence. Real influence is different. Real influence is the ability to help others see that what is genuinely best for them and for the collective mission they're part of is exactly what you're asking them to move toward. When you achieve this, you don't get compliance. You get commitment. And commitment is exponentially more powerful than compliance in every measurable dimension. The foundation of ethical influence begins with a neurological truth that most leaders and most MBA programs fail to fully integrate. Every human decision is an emotional decision, justified afterward with rational reasoning. We do not analyze options with cool logic and then select the optimal one. We feel drawn towards certain options for reasons we are often only dimly aware of, and then we construct logical arguments to support the choice we've already emotionally made. This is not a flaw in human cognition. It is a feature, a sophisticated, rapid evaluation system that processes context, history, and social signals far faster than conscious analysis can. Leaders who try to influence through logic alone are fighting against this reality. Leaders who understand it work with it, addressing both the emotional and the rational systems simultaneously in that order. Here are the 7 principles of ethical influence that the most effective leaders in America's most successful organizations apply every day. Reciprocity activation. The human brain is wired at a deep biological level to return what it receives. When you lead with genuine value, when you share an insight that helps someone solve a problem they didn't ask you to help with, when you create an opportunity for someone else's advancement, when you offer support without tracking what you're owed in return, you activate a psychological momentum toward cooperation that no amount of logical argument can manufacture. The critical distinction is this: reciprocity activation only works when the value you provide is genuinely offered, not strategically dangled as bait. People have exquisite detectors for inauthenticity. The moment they sense manipulation behind a gift, the mechanism inverts. It generates suspicion rather than goodwill. Social proof, amplification. When we are uncertain what the right path is, we look to what others, particularly others we respect or identify with, are doing. This is not irrationality. It is intelligent use of available data. Leaders use this principle ethically by sharing specific, verifiable examples of how similar people in similar situations have succeeded using comparable approaches, not vague authority claims. Concrete stories. 3 other hospitals in our network implemented this protocol and reduced adverse events by 22% in the first quarter. Scarcity and urgency. Done. Honestly, genuine scarcity is not manipulation. Most opportunities really are time-limited. Most resources really are finite. Most windows really do close. The ethical leader communicates these realities clearly, completely, and without theatrical exaggeration. This budget allocation decision is being finalized Friday. If we want our project fully funded, we need to present our case Thursday morning, is honest urgency. Creating artificial deadlines, inventing competing offers, or implying scarcity that doesn't exist. These are not leadership techniques. They are short-term tactics that will cost you every relationship they're applied to. Commitment and consistency. Leverage. People have a powerful, well-documented psychological drive to remain consistent with commitments they have made, especially commitments made publicly. Leaders use this principle not by pressuring others to commit, but by helping them articulate their own goals and values, and then connecting proposed actions to those self-stated priorities. You've said the most important thing to you is building a team that can function without constant oversight. Here's why this training investment directly serves that goal. The alignment you create is intrinsic, not imposed. It sustains itself. Authority through demonstrated competence. Authority that is claimed evaporates. Authority that is demonstrated compounds. Every time you make a prediction that proves accurate, offer a solution that proves effective, or share an insight that proves valuable, you make a deposit in the trust account that your words draw on in every future conversation. Build that account consistently. and your words will carry weight in rooms you're not even physically present in. Genuine likability. People are more open to influence from those they genuinely like, trust, and feel understood by. This is not a technique. It is a consequence of authentic curiosity about others, of consistent reliability, of the demonstrated willingness to find common ground without surrendering your own perspective. The leaders who are most broadly influential in America's most admired organizations are almost universally described as people who make you feel like the most important person in the room. Not because they are performing that feeling, because they actually prioritize it. Rational justification, support. Even after the emotional decision has been made, people need logical scaffolding to feel good about their choice, to defend it to others, to maintain commitment when it's challenged, and to act on it with confidence. Leaders provide this scaffolding not as the primary instrument of influence, but as the essential supporting structure that makes emotional alignment sustainable. Data, precedent, strategic logic, measurable outcomes, these belong in every persuasive communication. They just work best when they arrive after the emotional foundation has been established. The ultimate test of real influence is not what happens in the room where you applied it. It is what happens after you leave. When people talk about your ideas with enthusiasm to colleagues who weren't there, when they advocate for your initiatives in conversations you'll never know happened, when they bring you into challenges you didn't create, because they've learned that your involvement consistently produces better outcomes, that is influence at its full power, and it only grows from the roots of genuine respect, authentic connection, and demonstrated trustworthiness, never from manipulation. The conversations nobody wants to have, and why leaders seek them out. There is a direct correlation between the willingness to have difficult conversations and the quality of every professional and personal relationship you will ever maintain. Most people avoid difficult conversations until the avoidance itself becomes the problem. They let small frustrations compound into large resentments. They allow chronic underperformance to become entrenched because no one has said the honest thing out loud. They watch relationships that could have been saved deteriorate past the point of repair because they prioritize short-term comfort over long-term trust. Leaders do something different. They pursue difficult conversations, not because they enjoy discomfort, very few people do, but because they understand that honest, skillfully handled conflict is one of the most powerful relationship-building tools available. The conversations that most people dread are, in the hands of a skilled communicator, the conversations that create the deepest trust. Understanding why this is true requires understanding what's actually happening in your brain when conflict arises. When someone challenges your position, questions your judgment, or expresses frustration with a decision you've made, your nervous system does something it has been doing for 200,000 years. It activates a threat response. Your amygdala fires. Your cortisol rises. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles complex reasoning, strategic thinking, and empathy, partially goes offline. This is why smart, capable people say things in conflict that they immediately regret. It is why teams that function brilliantly in normal conditions collapse under pressure. It is why the most common management failure is not a lack of strategy, but a failure to address the interpersonal dynamics that quietly undermine everything the strategy is trying to achieve. Leaders have done the work of rewiring their nervous system's response to conflict, not to eliminate the response. That is neither possible nor desirable. Your body's stress signals are important data, but to create enough space between stimulus and response to choose how to engage, rather than simply reacting to what feels threatening, Here are the 5 frameworks that make difficult conversations productive rather than destructive. Emotional state management. Before entering any challenging conversation, leaders take deliberate responsibility for their internal state. This means processing your own emotional response privately before attempting to address it with the other party. If you arrive at a difficult conversation carrying unprocessed frustration, that frustration will shape your word choices, your body language, and your capacity to listen, all in ways that undermine the outcome you're trying to create. This also includes physical preparation. Difficult conversations require greater cognitive and emotional resources than ordinary interactions. They should not happen when either party is sleep-deprived, physically depleted, or already managing another high-stakes situation. Leaders choose the timing of difficult conversations with the same deliberateness they bring to everything else. Perspective, preparation. Before addressing any conflict, invest time genuinely attempting to understand the other person's experience, not to agree with it, not to preemptively concede anything, simply to develop an accurate understanding of how they perceive the situation, what pressures they're operating under, what history is shaping their current reactions, what legitimate concerns are embedded in their behavior, even when that behavior is creating problems. This preparation changes the conversation before it begins. When you enter a difficult discussion having genuinely tried to understand the other person's position, your questions are different, your listening is different, and your capacity to find real solutions is dramatically expanded. Outcome orientation. Most people enter difficult conversations focused on who is right and who needs to acknowledge that. Leaders enter them focused on what outcome will serve everyone's legitimate interests. Before every difficult conversation, ask yourself, what needs to be true at the end of this exchange for both of us to walk away with our dignity intact and the actual problem genuinely addressed? This shift from positional thinking to interest-based thinking is one of the most powerful transformations available in leadership communication. Positions are what people say they want. Interests are why they want it. When you focus on underlying interests, solutions become possible that direct positional debate makes entirely invisible. Strategic vulnerability. Difficult conversations require someone to take the first step toward openness. Leaders regularly choose to be that person, not because vulnerability is comfortable, but because it is strategically the most effective way to dissolve defensiveness and create the conditions for honest dialogue. Strategic vulnerability means acknowledging your own contribution to the problem without claiming responsibility for the entire problem. I recognize that implementing this system change without consulting your team created a significant disruption. That was a failure of process on my part. I'd like to understand the full impact so we can address it directly. This kind of statement disarms the defensive posture that most conflict produces and opens a door that neither party could have walked through otherwise. Solution-focused dialogue. Structure. Effective conflict conversations follow a deliberate sequence. First, acknowledge the other person's experience. Second, share your perspective without making theirs wrong. Third, identify the shared interests and common ground that both parties genuinely care about. Fourth, generate multiple possible paths forward together. Fifth, commit to specific next steps and establish clear accountability for each. This structure is not a script. It is a scaffold, a framework that keeps a difficult conversation moving toward resolution rather than cycling through the same wounds repeatedly. The most advanced skill in difficult conversations is what I call the empathy bridge, demonstrating such thorough understanding of the other person's experience that they feel genuinely heard before you have introduced a single element of your own perspective. If I'm understanding correctly, you're frustrated because the new reporting requirements have added 2 hours to every week cycle, and you're already carrying a full load without any additional support to absorb that. Is that accurate? When people feel heard at that level, their nervous systems physically relax, the defensive architecture comes down, and suddenly a conversation that felt impossible becomes not just possible, but productive. Building consensus without losing ground. Let's clear up one of the most costly misconceptions in American leadership culture. Consensus does not mean unanimity. Consensus means everyone commits to supporting the decision, even when they would have made a different one. This distinction matters enormously. Leaders who confuse consensus with agreement spend vast amounts of organizational energy trying to achieve something that is neither realistic nor, in many cases, desirable. Healthy organizations contain people with genuinely different perspectives, priorities, and information. If you are trying to get everyone to see things identically, you are not building consensus. You are either suppressing dissent or manipulating your team into artificial alignment. Neither produces durable results. True consensus is about process, not outcome. It is about creating a decision-making environment that people experience as fair, inclusive, and transparent, so that when the final decision is made, even those who preferred a different outcome feel respected enough to invest in executing the one that was chosen. The psychological research on this is consistent and striking. People care less about whether the outcome matches their preference than they care about whether the process by which it was reached was just. Give people a fair process, and they will commit to outcomes they disagree with. Give them an unfair process, and they will resist outcomes they would have chosen themselves. This is the operating principle behind decision architecture, the foundation of everything else in this chapter. Decision architecture. Before any significant discussion begins, establish explicit clarity about 4 things. What kind of decision is this? Are we gathering input, seeking advice, or making a final call? Who holds the decision-making authority when the discussion concludes? What criteria will determine which option is best? What constraints, budget, timeline, capacity, bound what is actually implementable? This clarity transforms the quality of everything that follows. When people understand what role their input plays in the final outcome, they participate more constructively, more honestly, and with less of the territorial maneuvering that unfocused decision processes tend to generate. Structured input gathering. Open discussion favors the loudest voices. Structured input gathering ensures that the full range of relevant perspectives, including those held by people who are introverted, junior, or simply more thoughtful than reactive, actually reaches the table. Techniques include round-robin sharing, where every person contributes before anyone responds, anonymous pre-work, where complex or sensitive input is gathered in writing before the meeting, and small group breakouts that give people time to process and discuss before introducing their perspectives to the larger group. Structured input gathering also means asking specific, productive questions instead of general ones. Not, "What do you think about this proposal?" but, "What implementation risks do you see that we haven't adequately addressed? What resources would make this succeed that we haven't planned for? How would this affect your team's current priorities?" These questions generate actionable information rather than abstract opinion. Tension normalization. Great leaders don't manage conflict by eliminating it. They manage it by naming it openly and positioning it as useful. Most organizational tensions are legitimate. Speed versus quality. Growth versus stability. Innovation versus risk management. Individual performance versus team cohesion. These tensions do not have perfect resolutions. They have calibrated trade-offs that serve the current context better than the available alternatives. When leaders pretend these tensions don't exist, or rush to false resolution that buries the conflict rather than addressing it, the tension doesn't go away. It goes underground and reemerges, more damaging at the worst possible moments. We have a real tension here between moving quickly to capture market share and moving carefully to protect quality. Any decision we make will involve trade-offs. I want us to be intentional about which trade-offs we're making and why, rather than optimizing for one dimension while pretending the other doesn't matter. That sentence doesn't solve the tension. It creates the conditions under which a real solution can be built. Commitment. Calibration. When a decision has been made, the work is not finished. Leaders ensure that every person who is expected to support or implement the decision understands specifically what their role requires. What actions, what resources, what timeline, and what accountability structure will track the follow-through. Commitment calibration also means helping people find personal motivation to support decisions they didn't prefer. This is not manipulation. It is leadership. Connecting someone's individual purpose to the collective mission, helping them see how a decision they disagreed with serves a goal they genuinely care about. This is the work that transforms organizational buy-in from performance into reality. Dissent integration. The most effective defense against catastrophically bad decisions is an organizational culture where dissent is actively sought, not politely tolerated. Leaders who use pre-mortem analysis, where teams imagine the decision has failed 6 months in the future and work backward to identify what went wrong, consistently produce more robust decisions than those who rely on positive orientation planning alone. Ask regularly, what are we not considering? Who would be most negatively affected by this path? What's the most compelling argument against our current direction? These questions do not signal uncertainty. They signal intellectual rigor. And over time, they build the kind of trust that makes people genuinely willing to bring you their best thinking rather than their most politically safe thinking. The contagion of calm, emotional regulation. Under pressure. Your emotional state is not private. It has never been private. Long before you say a single word, your internal condition is broadcasting itself through channels that every nervous system in the room is reading in real time. The pace of your breath, the tension in your jaw, the micro movements in your hands, the slight changes in your vocal resonance when anxiety enters your body. These signals travel from you to everyone around you at a speed that consciousness cannot intercept, and they trigger corresponding physiological responses in every person you're communicating with. This is emotional contagion, and it is not a metaphor. It is a neurological reality, documented exhaustively in research across disciplines from social neuroscience to organizational psychology to behavioral economics. You are, in every interaction, sharing your internal state with the people you're communicating with, whether you intend to or not. For most people, this reality is a vulnerability. For leaders who understand it and take responsibility for it, it is a tool. Perhaps the most powerful tool available. Think about the leaders who have had the greatest positive impact on organizations you've been part of. The consistent characteristic you'll find is not brilliance, not charisma, not even strategic clarity, though all of these help. It is the ability to remain grounded when circumstances are not, to be the stable center from which others calibrate their own sense of what is manageable and what is possible. This is not an accident. It is not a temperamental gift. It is trained capacity. And it begins with understanding how the stress response works at the neurological level. When your nervous system detects threat, real or perceived, physical or social, actual or anticipated, The prefrontal cortex that handles your most sophisticated cognitive functions begins to go offline. Your capacity for strategic thinking, for nuanced communication, for genuine empathy reduces. Your responses become reactive, binary, and defensive. You say things you immediately regret. You hear things that weren't said. You make decisions based on the urgency of the emotional state rather than the quality of available information. In this state, you are not leading. You are managing your own nervous system's fear response in real time, and doing it at the expense of everyone around you. The 5 frameworks below are not about eliminating this response. That is not physiologically possible and would be dangerous if it were. They are about developing the capacity to recognize the response early before it fully compromises your functioning and to regulate it quickly enough that you remain available as a leader. State awareness. Development. You cannot regulate a state you haven't noticed. The first and most foundational skill is learning to recognize your personal stress signature early, when there is still maximum choice about how to respond. Some people experience stress as physical tension in the neck and shoulders. Others notice digestive changes or changes in breathing depth. Some become mentally fragmented. Others hyper-narrow their focus in ways that eliminate peripheral information. Whatever your pattern is, knowing it is the difference between catching a problem in the first inning and discovering it in the 9th. Physiological reset techniques. Your emotional state and your physiological state are deeply interconnected, which means you can shift one by changing the other. Slow, deep diaphragmatic breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system and promotes calm, clear-headed functioning in as little as 60 to 90 seconds. Progressive muscle relaxation systematically releases the physical tension that perpetuates emotional stress. Short, deliberate walks reset both cognitive clarity and emotional baseline through movement, light, and the simple change of physical environment. These are not wellness suggestions. They are performance protocols. The difference between going into a difficult conversation at full capacity and going in half compromised. Cognitive reframing under pressure. Much of what we experience as stress is not a direct response to external events, but to the stories we tell ourselves about what those events mean. Someone who seems critical in a meeting might be under extraordinary personal pressure with nothing to do with you. A project that's hitting obstacles might be encountering the same obstacles that precede every breakthrough in this domain. These are not rationalizations. They are genuinely plausible, alternative interpretations, and actively considering them reduces the cortisol load of situations that seem threatening and reveals options that the threat framing was making invisible. Strategic emotional expression. Emotional regulation does not mean emotional suppression. There are moments when expressing genuine concern is exactly what motivates a team to take a problem seriously. There are moments when authentic enthusiasm creates the social permission for others to invest their full creative energy. There are moments when clearly expressed frustration, disciplined, targeted, and quickly redirected toward solutions, is exactly the right signal to send. The distinction between emotional expression that serves the situation and emotional expression that hijacks it is strategic intent. Does this expression serve the people in this room and the outcome I'm here to create? Or does it serve only the temporary relief of releasing internal pressure at others' expense? Stress communication. Protocols. When you are carrying significant stress, an important communication must happen anyway. There are specific strategies for maintaining effectiveness. Acknowledge the state when appropriate. I want to be transparent that I'm carrying some pressure about this situation, and I don't want that to interfere with the quality of this conversation. Because transparency about your state is exponentially less disruptive than the version of it that leaks unacknowledged. Adjust your communication timelines when the stakes warrant it, and recognize the signals: faster speech, more absolute language, reduced listening quality, lower tolerance for ambiguity. That tell you regulation strategies are needed before the conversation continues. The leader who manages their internal state as a form of service to others is the leader who can be depended on when conditions are worst. That dependability is one of the most powerful sources of organizational trust available. Vision that moves people, the art of inspirational messaging. Vision is not a mission statement. It is not a slide deck. It is not the paragraph that appears in your company's annual report between the chairman's letter and the financial tables. Vision is a feeling. It is the visceral, emotionally resonant sense that the future you're describing is not only possible, but inevitable, and that the person listening to you is essential to making it real. Most leaders communicate objectives. A very few communicate vision. The difference between those two categories of leadership is the difference between a team that does what's required and a team that gives everything they have to something that feels genuinely worth giving everything for. The neuroscience of why vision works differently than strategy begins with the chemicals of motivation. When people connect emotionally to meaningful outcomes, when they can feel the future in their body before it has happened, their brains release dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin in combinations that dramatically increase focus, persistence through adversity, and creative problem solving. This is not an analogy. These neurochemical states are physiologically measurable. They are the biological signature of inspired effort. Strategy activates the prefrontal cortex. Vision activates the limbic system. And the limbic system is older, more powerful, and more directly connected to the motivated behavior that determines whether an organization achieves extraordinary outcomes or delivers competent, unsatisfying adequacy. Here is the most important principle in vision casting. People do not invest deeply in organizational objectives. They invest in personal meaning, in opportunities to grow, to contribute to something larger than themselves, to develop mastery, to create impact that will outlast the immediate effort. The leader who understands this frames every collective objective in terms of what it will mean for each individual who helps achieve it. Future-present connection. The most powerful vision communication makes the future sensory specific, not just described, but experienced. Not, we will increase market share by 15%, but our customers will tell their colleagues and their friends about us because they cannot imagine getting this level of service anywhere else. And those referrals will be the foundation of everything we build next. That is not a metric. It is a scene. And the brain processes scenes differently than it processes metrics, with engagement, with emotion, and with the neurochemical cocktail of motivation. Practice making the future specific, sensory, and human. Who is there? What are they saying? What does it feel like to have done the work and arrived at the outcome? The more vivid the picture, the stronger the motivational pull toward it. Personal relevance. Integration. Generic vision messaging is the most expensive kind of communication you can produce because it costs time, attention, and credibility while producing no durable motivation. People who are driven by mastery need to hear how this vision will make them better at what they care about becoming excellent in. People who are motivated by security need to understand how this path leads to stability and durability, not just excitement. People who are energized by social impact need to see how the work connects to outcomes that matter beyond the bottom line. Effective vision casting requires knowing your audience at the individual level, not just their role, but their genuine motivations, their personal career aspirations, and the values that would Make them proud of the work they're doing. With that knowledge, you can craft messaging that speaks to those motivations rather than bypassing them. Obstacle. Acknowledgement with solution. Confidence. The most credible vision is not the most optimistic vision. It is the most honest vision. Leaders who gloss over genuine challenges in favor of unqualified enthusiasm do not inspire confidence. They undermine it. People are not naive. They know that significant achievements require significant effort, and that the path between here and the compelling future you're describing will include moments of genuine difficulty, frustration, and doubt. Acknowledging this reality, specifically, honestly, without dramatizing it, actually strengthens the motivational impact of vision messaging rather than weakening it. This will require each of us to develop capabilities we don't currently have. There will be weeks where the progress isn't visible and the effort feels disproportionate to the results. I want to be honest about that. And I also want to tell you that every piece of capability we build through this challenge is ours permanently. It makes us stronger for every challenge that comes after it. That is a vision that people trust enough to run toward. Collective agency. Emphasis. The most inspiring visions position every person in the room as essential, not as a recipient of change that others are directing, but as an architect of outcomes that belong to all of them. This requires specific clarity about individual contributions, not "your work matters." That is too vague to create real motivation. But the quality control framework you're building is what allows us to scale without sacrificing the customer experience that makes us different from everyone else. Without your specific expertise applied here, the growth we're planning will erode the thing that makes it worth pursuing. That level of specificity is not flattery. It is accurate description of why each person's particular contribution is genuinely necessary to the outcome. And it creates a form of psychological ownership that no amount of enthusiasm or positional authority can replicate. Leading through fire. Crisis communication that builds trust. Here is the unvarnished truth about leadership. The credibility you build during ordinary times is what you spend during extraordinary ones. Anyone can sound confident and capable when everything is running according to plan. The real measure of leadership communication, the test that reveals what is actually there beneath the polish and the preparation, is what happens when something goes badly wrong, when a product fails publicly, when a key hire turns out to be the wrong one, when an external crisis hits the organization sideways before anyone has had time to prepare a response. In those moments, how you communicate is not just important. It is everything. The psychology of crisis reveals why most leaders fail under pressure in ways they never would have predicted about themselves. When something goes seriously wrong, the same threat response circuitry that governed your ancestors' survival activates in the boardroom. Fight or flight appears in modern corporate form. Denial and minimization on one side, panic and information chaos on the other. Both responses destroy trust at exactly the moment when trust is most critical. And both are driven by the same underlying impulse, the desperate desire to protect against the discomfort of being seen as responsible for something that has gone wrong. Effective crisis communication requires setting this impulse aside completely, not suppressing it, recognizing it, understanding what it's doing to your communication instincts, and choosing differently. Immediate acknowledgement with context. The single most important principle in crisis communication is speed of acknowledgement. When a problem has occurred, your stakeholders need to know three things as quickly as possible. You are aware. You understand the significance. You are actively responding. What you do not need to communicate immediately is a complete account of what happened, why it happened, and exactly what will be done about it. Waiting for that level of clarity before communicating anything at all is one of the most common and costly crisis communication mistakes. The silence is not neutral. It is interpreted as ignorance, as dishonesty, or as an attempt to manage the story before sharing it. None of these interpretations serves you. Partial, honest, timely communication is nearly always superior to complete, polished, delayed communication. Update frequently, even when the update is, "We don't have new information yet, but we're actively investigating and we'll have a more complete picture within 4 hours." This consistency demonstrates active management and maintains the trust that silence would quietly erode. Responsibility, ownership without defensive justification. When mistakes have contributed to a crisis, leaders acknowledge this clearly, specifically, and without the hedging, excuse-making, and blame diffusion that make responsibility acknowledgments feel hollow and untrustworthy. This is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of crisis communication. The instinct is that owning responsibility will make things worse, will open you to more criticism, more accountability, more consequences. In practice, the opposite is reliably true. Clear, genuine accountability acknowledgement is one of the fastest ways to shift a crisis from escalation to resolution, because it eliminates the adversarial dynamic and opens the door to collaborative problem solving. We should have built more redundancy into this system. We didn't. And that's a leadership gap that I own. Here's what we've already done in the last 24 hours to address the immediate situation. And here's what we're putting in place to ensure this doesn't happen again. That statement doesn't invite more criticism. It closes the loop on criticism by removing what it feeds on. Solution-focused messaging with realistic timelines. After acknowledgement and accountability, everything shifts to action. What specific steps are being taken? By whom? With what resources? On what timeline? The word specific is doing a great deal of work in that sentence. Vague reassurances, "We're working hard to address the situation. Our team is on it. We remain committed to our customers," do not reassure anyone. They are the verbal equivalent of an out-of-office message. What reassures people is operational specificity. We have redirected 8 engineers from non-critical projects to this response. We have brought in external specialists with direct experience in this type of failure. We are conducting status reviews every 3 hours and will share each update publicly as it occurs. Stakeholder-specific communication. Adaptation. Different audiences need different information in different forms during a crisis. Executives need strategic framing and financial context. Frontline teams need operational clarity and specific direction. Customers need service impact information and timeline expectations. Investors need risk assessment and recovery framework. Attempting to address all of these audiences with a single communication is a guarantee that each will feel inadequately served. Effective crisis communicators develop multiple versions of their messaging, each tuned to the specific concerns and decision-making needs of a different audience, and they deliver each version through the most appropriate channel for that audience, in the right sequence. Emotional regulation, modeling under pressure. During crisis, everyone in the organization is watching the leader's nervous system for cues about how serious the situation is and how much confidence to hold about the path forward. Leaders who project genuine calm, not false positivity, not minimization, but grounded, strategic composure, activate something close to miraculous in their organizations. Teams that would otherwise fragment under pressure stabilize. Creative problem-solving emerges where panic would have suffocated it. The organization's capacity to function effectively through the crisis is directly proportional to the leader's capacity to model effective emotional regulation under it. This is not soft leadership. It is perhaps the most demanding technical skill in this entire book, and it is the one that separates the leaders organizations remember forever from the ones they are relieved to move past. The Master Negotiator's Playbook. Everything that has come before in this book has been preparation for this chapter. Negotiation is the arena where leadership communication is tested at its fullest extent, where certainty architecture, emotional regulation, framing, influence principles, and conflict frameworks all converge in a single high-stakes exchange that will determine outcomes meaningful enough to feel them for years. And yet, most Americans approach negotiation as adversarial combat, as a battle where one side's gain must come at the other's expense, and where the primary tactics are leverage, pressure, and the willingness to hold out longer than the other party can. This framework is not just psychologically exhausting. It is strategically inferior. Adversarial negotiations regularly produce outcomes that neither party would have chosen in a more creative, collaborative environment, and they reliably damage the relationships that would have generated far more value over time than the immediate transaction being contested. The most powerful negotiators in America's most consequential institutions, in private equity, in international diplomacy, in elite law, in high-stakes corporate strategy, share a common understanding that most people negotiate their entire careers without reaching. The best negotiations expand the available value before dividing it, rather than fighting over a fixed amount from the start. This is the foundational shift that transforms a capable negotiator into an exceptional one. Comprehensive interest analysis. Most negotiations fail to reach their potential because both parties are focused on their positions, what they want, rather than their interests, why they want it. Positions often appear incompatible. Interests examined carefully almost always contain the seeds of creative solutions that satisfy both parties at a level neither could have achieved by grinding against each other's positions. Before any significant negotiation, the exceptional negotiator invests substantial time investigating the true interests behind the other party's stated positions. If they are insisting on a specific delivery timeline, what business pressure is driving that? If they are demanding particular contract terms, what risk are they trying to mitigate? Or what precedent are they trying to set? Understanding these underlying interests reveals options that remain completely invisible to someone operating only at the level of what is being asked for. This analysis must include honest clarity about your own interests, not just your stated positions. Many people enter negotiations with internal contradictions in their own priorities that prevent them from recognizing acceptable solutions when they appear. Must-haves, nice-to-haves, and deal-breakers need to be clarified internally before you sit down at the table with anyone else. Strategic relationship management. Every negotiation exists within the context of a relationship that will extend beyond the transaction. Leaders consider how every tactical choice will affect not just the immediate outcome, but the long-term working relationship, the reputation it creates in shared professional networks, and the precedent it establishes for every future interaction. Strategic relationship management means choosing approaches that achieve your objectives while maintaining mutual respect. This is not the same as being soft or accommodating beyond what your interests require. It means avoiding tactics that produce short-term advantage at the cost of the relationship's long-term value. Because in most negotiations between parties who will interact again, the relationship is worth substantially more than the transaction. Value creation through option generation. Traditional negotiation assumes fixed resources to be divided, Advanced negotiation focuses on creative expansion of the available value before any division begins. This might involve timing structures that reduce costs for one party while creating advantages for another. It might involve resource-sharing arrangements that provide access neither party could afford independently. It might involve creative structuring of benefits across different dimensions, some financial, some operational, some reputational, in ways that allow each party to optimize for what matters most to them, without requiring the other to sacrifice equivalently. This kind of creativity emerges from a specific practice, separating idea generation from idea evaluation. Generate multiple possible approaches without immediately assessing their viability. This separation prevents premature dismissal of options that seem impossible initially, but become viable through modification or combination. Anchoring and framing strategy. The first number or framework introduced in a negotiation has a disproportionate influence on every subsequent discussion. This is anchoring, a well-documented cognitive phenomenon that shapes perception without people realizing it is happening. Effective negotiators understand this and use it ethically. By establishing frameworks early in a discussion that create a reference landscape favorable to their objectives. They also understand that allowing the other party to set all the early anchors is a significant strategic concession, and they prepare to introduce their own reference points at the appropriate moments. Tactical flexibility with strategic consistency. The best negotiators maintain absolute clarity about their strategic objectives while remaining completely flexible about the tactics used to reach them. If analytical framing isn't moving things forward, shift to story-based communication. If individual meetings are producing circular discussion, suggest a structured group process or external facilitation. If the conversation has become too abstract, bring it back to concrete specifics. If the concrete discussion has become too granular, elevate to shared principles that both parties can agree on before working back down to specifics. Strategic consistency means never getting so invested in a particular approach that you miss a better solution. The goal is the outcome. The tactics are instruments, valuable only insofar as they serve the objective. The ultimate measure of a negotiation is not whether you won. It is whether the agreement you reached serves everyone's legitimate interests well enough that all parties are genuinely committed to implementing it, and whether the relationship that produced it is stronger, not weaker, for the experience. That is what master negotiators build, and it is built on every skill this book has developed, applied simultaneously and with full commitment. The architecture of unshakable personal authority. This is where everything comes together. Personal authority is the sum of what you know, who you are, how you treat people, and the gap, or the absence of a gap, between what you say and what you do. It cannot be purchased, awarded, or inherited. It can only be built over hundreds of interactions, through thousands of decisions, in the accumulated impression that you leave on every person who has had the experience of working with you, working for you, or working alongside you. Most people seek authority through external achievement, the promotion, the title, the credential, the accomplishment that they hope will signal to others that they have arrived. External achievement matters. It provides context and establishes credibility in initial interactions. But it is not authority. Authority is the result of who you are in the room after the credential has been noted and set aside. It is the quality of your thinking, the steadiness of your character, the generosity of your engagement, and the consistency of your follow-through. None of these are traits you either have or don't have. All of them are capacities that can be developed. Here is how. The first element, physical confidence. Before you speak a word, your body has already delivered its communication. Posture, movement quality, eye contact, the way you occupy space. These are broadcasting signals that the subconscious minds of everyone in the room are receiving and processing in real time. Physical confidence is not dominance. It is ease. It is the quality of someone who is comfortable occupying the space they're in, not contracting into it to minimize their presence, not expanding aggressively into others' space to assert it, but inhabiting their physical reality with quiet, natural authority. This ease can be cultivated deliberately. Practice upright posture not as performance, but as the physical expression of readiness. Practice sustained, warm eye contact that communicates genuine engagement rather than either avoidance or intimidation. Practice the kind of deliberate, unhurried movement that signals internal coherence, rather than the fidgeting and rushing that signal anxiety. Your voice is part of this physical authority. Deep, diaphragmatic breathing produces richer, more resonant vocal tone than the shallow chest breathing that stress produces. Slower pacing produces more authority than speed. Clear articulation communicates confidence in your message. These are not tricks. They are the physical infrastructure of the authority that others will experience as simply who you are. The second element: intellectual clarity. Authority is built on the perception that your thinking is more useful than the alternatives available. This perception is built through consistent demonstration of structured analysis, pattern recognition, and the ability to communicate complex ideas in language that others can immediately apply. Intellectual clarity requires constant investment in your thinking frameworks, the mental models from multiple disciplines that allow you to analyze novel situations quickly and generate insights that others miss. It requires the discipline of thinking something fully through before bringing it to others, rather than processing it aloud in ways that expose unresolved contradictions. And it requires the communication skill of making complex things simple without making them simplistic, which is perhaps the most valuable cognitive skill available to any leader. The third element: emotional stability. This is the element that people feel most before they can name it. Emotional stability, the capacity to remain grounded, clear, and accessible under conditions that would destabilize most people, communicates at a frequency that bypasses conscious analysis and lands directly in the nervous systems of those you're leading. People are remarkably sensitive to the emotional coherence of those they depend on. They detect inconsistency, fragility, and reactivity far more accurately and more quickly than most leaders realize. And the consequences of that detection are immediate: a reduction in the psychological safety that is absolutely prerequisite to the kind of honest communication and creative risk-taking that exceptional organizations run on. Emotional stability is developed through self-awareness, through the regulation practices described in Chapter 8, and through the accumulated experience of meeting difficult moments with composure, which, over time, reinforces the neural architecture of calm confidence rather than reactive fear. The fourth element: moral consistency. Nothing destroys authority faster than the perception that your behavior does not match your stated values. Nothing builds it more permanently than the consistent experience, over time, of watching you honor your principles when honoring them comes at a cost. Moral consistency is not moral perfection. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone makes decisions in hindsight they would have made differently. What creates authority is not the absence of those moments, but the way you handle them, with transparency, with genuine accountability, and with the willingness to absorb the consequences without deflecting them toward others. The leaders who are most deeply trusted, not just respected but genuinely trusted, are the ones whose teams know that what they say in public is what they believe in private, and that what they promise they will do, they will actually do. This consistency, accumulated over time, becomes a form of social capital that supports your influence in every future situation where it's called upon. The fifth element, strategic generosity. The most enduring authority is not built through what you accumulate, but through what you create for others. Leaders who are known for sharing their knowledge, creating opportunities for those below them, offering support before it is asked for, and making connections that advance others' legitimate interests, build networks of mutual trust and goodwill that amplify their influence far beyond what individual achievement alone could generate. This is not transaction. It is genuine investment in the success of the people around you. Investment that reflects the understanding that your authority is ultimately served not by accumulating personal advantage, but by creating conditions in which the people you lead achieve outcomes they couldn't have reached without you. That is the highest form of leadership authority, and it is the one that lasts. The power of questions, leading through curiosity. Here is the leadership insight that most people never fully integrate because it runs so directly against the assumption that created their ambition in the first place. The most powerful leaders are not the ones with the best answers. They are the ones with the best questions. Questions are not a sign of uncertainty. In the hands of a skilled leader, they are the most precise instruments available for shaping thought, unlocking insight, and guiding people toward solutions that carry exponentially more commitment than solutions they were simply handed. The psychology of why questions create this result is elegant and well documented. When you tell someone what to do, you are asking them to borrow your judgment. When you help them discover what to do, you are developing their judgment, and they take ownership of both the conclusion and the path that led to it. The commitment that results from self-discovered insight is qualitatively different from the compliance that results from instruction. It is more durable, more creative, and more generative under pressure. Questions also do something that statements cannot. They demonstrate respect. When you ask someone a thoughtful question, you are communicating that you believe they have something valuable to contribute, perspectives, knowledge, or experience that matters to the outcome. This respect creates psychological safety, and psychological safety is the condition under which honest, creative, high-quality thinking becomes possible. Here is a critical distinction. Not all questions are equally powerful. Leading questions, the kind that telegraph the answer you're expecting, generate compliance rather than genuine thinking. Superficial questions, the kind that can be answered at the surface without engaging the underlying complexity, waste time rather than creating insight. Random questions create confusion rather than direction. Strategic questions are carefully designed to achieve specific cognitive and emotional objectives. They direct attention to aspects of a situation that haven't been fully examined. They create productive discomfort that motivates deeper analysis. They help people see their own thinking more clearly and find the answers that are genuinely theirs to find. Awareness-building questions. These questions expand the mental frame that a person or team is working within. They interrupt tunnel vision and invite broader, more objective examination. What would someone approaching this challenge for the very first time notice about how we're thinking about it? What assumptions have we been making for so long that we've stopped questioning them? When you step back and look at the pattern over the past 12 months, what do you see that you can't see when you're in it? These questions don't provide answers. They create the mental space within which better answers can emerge. Accountability. Generating questions. These questions connect current thinking to future responsibility in ways that build genuine commitment rather than surface agreement. What specifically will you do differently as a result of this conversation? By when? What would make it hard to follow through on that? And what will you do when that obstacle appears? These questions are not interrogation. They are respect. The assumption that the person you're talking with is capable of making and keeping meaningful commitments. Coaching questions. What matters most to you about this situation? What would need to be true for you to feel fully confident in this decision? What's the smallest step you could take in the next 24 hours that would create real forward momentum? These questions activate autonomy, agency, and intrinsic motivation. They move people from passive reception to active authorship of their own path forward. Perspective shifting questions. How would the customer whose problem we're trying to solve describe this situation? What would we do if we had unlimited resources? What would we do if we had half the resources we have now? What would the version of us that succeeds at this look like? And what do they do differently than we're doing now? These questions shake loose the assumptions that bind current thinking and create access to genuinely novel approaches. Deepening questions. What's underneath that? Why does that matter to you? What would happen if that concern turned out to be fully justified? And what would happen if it turned out to be unfounded? What are you most afraid of in this situation, and what does that fear tell you about what you actually care about most? These questions move beyond the surface of what people say to the roots of what they believe, value, and need, which is where all durable solutions are actually found. Active listening is the indispensable partner of strategic questioning. Asking a powerful question and then listening with only half your attention is the communicative equivalent of building a precision instrument and using it as a blunt object. Real listening, the kind that hears not just the words but the hesitation, the energy, the things being said around the edges of what is explicitly stated, requires the complete suspension of the listening to respond mode that most people operate in. True listening is listening to understand. And the understanding it produces is not just information gathering. It is the deepest form of respect available in human interaction, the experience of being fully seen by another person. When people feel truly listened to, they open in ways that no amount of persuasion, logic, or authority can produce. The ultimate expression of leadership through questions is the creation of organizations where the quality of thinking is elevated by the quality of questions being asked, where curiosity is systematically rewarded, where assumptions are regularly examined, and where the best ideas emerge not from the top of the hierarchy, but from the intersections of perspectives that strategic questioning has made it safe to express. That is the organization that learns faster, adapts better, and builds more durable competitive advantage than any other kind. And it is built, one well-placed question at a time, by the leader who understands that the most powerful thing they can say is sometimes not a statement at all. Your voice, your legacy. You have reached the end of this book, but you have not reached the end of what is possible for you. Everything that separates the leaders who transform organizations from the ones who merely manage them, every framework, every principle, every practice across these 13 chapters is available to you. Not someday, when circumstances align and confidence arrives uninvited. Now, today, in the next conversation you have, the next meeting you enter, the next moment when someone looks to you for direction. Leadership communication is not a talent you either have or lack. It is a system, and systems can be learned, practiced, and mastered by anyone willing to commit to the process. But here is what I want you to understand most deeply. As you close this book, the communication skills you have developed, the certainty architecture, the strategic silence, the reframing capacity, the influence principles, the emotional regulation, the visionary messaging. These are not tools for getting ahead. They are tools for creating genuine value, for building teams that trust each other, for navigating crisis without losing integrity, for helping people see possibilities in themselves they couldn't see before you showed them. The most enduring leadership legacy is not the outcomes achieved. It is the capability left behind, the people who were expanded, the thinking that was elevated, the culture that was created, the organizations that became better, not just while you were there, but because you were there. Your words have always had power. They have always been building something or eroding it, opening possibilities or closing them, honoring the people you communicate with, or diminishing them in ways so subtle neither of you fully noticed. Now you know what that power is. And now you have the frameworks to direct it. Use it well. Lead with clarity. Speak with intention. Listen with full presence. The voice you bring to the world matters more than you know.